Almost every single morning right at daylight I'm usually out walking, and I'll usually do it on foot to go check on the cattle. When I'd be back there checking the cows, there would be a dozen to 15 deer out there at night before dark. And it didn't really dawn on me until after that, but about 2 or 3 days before that, when I'd go back there, I never saw a deer. And I kind of put this together after it happened, that I think those wolves were in that area, and the deer knew it and they left. And we will find that with the deer around here too. Like I say, we do have a good amount of deer around, but all of a sudden it'll be like there isn't a deer here. They're gone, and it just seems like it takes about a week and a half before they come back to their normal activity. I've lived on this farm all my life, and we've had cattle here. Never had any issues until about 12 years ago. I remember just a little bit back here in the woods, there's a place where the deer would yard up. I got in there and I found about 3 deer that were in a small area, and all you found were these skulls and the spines. There wasn't enough fresh snow that you could really see any tracks or anything, but after talking to other people there, they kind of said that sounds like a wolf. I do recall a story that my mother used to tell of when she was young. They actually lost a calf, and this was back in the days when families pretty much, if they lost that calf, that probably meant some meals. They really needed that. And in those days, there were bounties on the wolves to keep them down. They started bringing them in here. They, I believe their number when they first started was supposedly 60 wolves, I think. And then as they started managing it, they brought that up to 350. And since that, the numbers have just gone way beyond that. They need to be managed and controlled, and we need, as farmers, need to have a way to protect our cattle as well. I've had people say they've seen the wolves along the edges of my pastures and stuff that are going by. It's just pretty nerve-wracking when you know they're around, and sometimes the cattle aren't acting right, and you know there's something going on. We had a dog. It was my daughter's dog that was staying here. And we had a routine every day when we go out to check the cattle that as soon as I'd start the four-wheeler up, the dog knew where we were going, and she would take off up through the field. And that one day, she started up the field and she came back and just cowered by me. And I looked up and there was a wolf on the backside of that field. And that dog did not go with me that day. She stayed here. One winter, I outwintered the cows on a field that was surrounded by woods on 3 sides. My cattle are very gentle. We use a lot of low stress cattle handling to make it easier for the cattle and easier on us. I was finding that as soon as I would show up, the cattle would run to the other side of the field. And it just wasn't normal. Well, then we started looking, and on the sides, on the outside of the perimeter of that field, there were wolf tracks. It took probably until halfway through the summer before those cattle actually calmed down to normal. About a year or 2 later, I had just left here to go to a meeting one evening, and my wife was out in the yard, and we had a lab at that time, and the dog ran out to the road and was barking, and Carol looked up, and there was a wolf across the road in the field.
Right across from a mailbox.
So that was the first sighting we had of them real close. I had other neighbors and stuff that occasionally were starting to say they were seeing them. And that went on for 2 or 3 years. And then in April, my cattle were having calves. It's an area that's a little bit brushy and stuff. The cows like to go in there to have their calves and hide them down for a while. And I check them a couple times a day, and usually just before dark I would always go out and check. And at that point I probably had 4 or 5 calves on the ground. And there was one that was just born that day. I had it tagged, and I went out and checked that night, and everything seemed okay. The next morning I was out there. Most of the cows were all gone from that area. There were 2 cows left there, and only one of them had a calf. And then I did notice off to the side there was an eagle sitting there in the pasture. And I figured there's got to be something. I went over there, and that's when I found the carcass of this calf. Nothing left from the back of the calf. There was a little bit of the front shoulders left and the head, and that was all that was left of that calf, and that's all occurred overnight. I called USDA Wildlife Services, and they came out here, and he was looking at the carcass trying to determine the kill of it again, and while he was doing that, it was quite grassy, so it was hard to find any tracks. But as he was doing that, I walked around and I did find a few tracks, and he verified that they were wolf tracks. So they came out the next week and they put up flags, and they probably did it around about 40 acres back there where the cows were. I didn't have any more issues with the wolves after that, and the cows were on there for probably 2 to 3 weeks. But by that time, the pasture was pretty much eaten by the cows. They needed more, so I ended up bringing them out of there to a different area. So they decided as long as the cows weren't there, they took it back down. And I never had any problem with it since that. They asked for a valuation of what the calf was. I told them $750 to $800 is what I would normally expect to get for that calf. And that following year, I did end up getting just a little bit over $400 for the calf. The day after that kill, I brought the calves up here to the paddock right behind the barn. It's probably about 4.5, 5 acres. And of course that was the spring of the year, so the ground was soft, and it didn't take the cows long, and they had that pretty well mudded up. And it pretty much destroyed that field for pasture or hay for the rest of the year. I left them there until they were pretty well done calving. We rotational graze. At that point there was a lot of grass out there, and it was time to start moving them across. The managed grazing works out very well. I guess I like seeing them out there walking around and eating the grass. I just feel that cows are meant to be out grazing and not confined, but with the wolves around, you pretty much don't have a choice. You've got to be careful. The rest of that year, occasionally you would hear the wolves howling in the evening. It was pretty nerve-wracking. You didn't know what you were going to find the next morning. Since that happened, now when I calve in the spring, I do bring them up to this paddock close to the barn. I've lost that acreage as far as any productive crop on it. Most years it may be very late in the year before the grass is able to come back to where it's worth grazing on. And I kind of stay away from the wooded areas as long as I can when I do the rotational grazing now. I guess as it gets later in summer, it seems like the wolves they've got enough fawns and things like that where they probably aren't looking for my cattle as much. And I do carry a pistol with me now when I do that. And I think about it too, as growing up here as kids, we lived out there in the woods playing. And what I think about it now, if my grandkids were out there, I think I would be very concerned to let them go out there and enjoy the woods the way that we used to.